Bogiyam jagurpuk tuhunimi meni koele Bogiyam jagurpuk tuhunimi meni koele Lathak nu mannayakal shalimi meni koele Lathak nu mannayakal shalimi meni koele Bogiyam jagurpuk tuhunimi meni koele Bogiyam jagurpuk tuhunimi meni koele Lathak nu mannayakal shalimi meni koele Lathak nu mannayakal shalimi meni koele Masasnumanin ithan satede gunin naya masasnumanin akharane jabisenam khatwalimi meni koele akharane jabisenam khatwalimi meni koele जाकटुताम चिशबुन फतेह तुम चिलम से जाकटुताम हाय हा दुनिया से पुचीम सिरमनी में कोयले हाय हा दुनिया से पुचीम सिरमनी में कोयले बोगियम जागुर पुक दुहुनी में कोयले बोगियम जागुर पुक दुहुनी में कोयले Lathak nu mannayakal shalimi meni koele Lathak nu mannayakal shalimi meni koele
क्या दिल कहे धड़के बिना लहू के बिना दो किनारे आपस में मिल रहे दूर रह के भी तेरा ही दिल रहे दो किनारे आपस में मिल रहे दूर रह के भी तेरा ही दिल रहे हम तेरा सहत सहत
meni koile lathak nu manaya kal shalimi meni koile lathak nu manaya kal shalimi meni koile ogiyam jagurpu tuhumi meni koile ogiyam jagurpu tuhumi meni koile lathak nu manaya kal shalimi meni koile lathak nu manaya kal shalimi meni koile.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jen Hyman. I'm PAI's Vice President of Communications and External Relations. Thank you so much for attending PAI's latest and greatest Catalyst session with Dr. Maliha Khan, President and CEO of Women Deliver. We're thrilled to have more than 125 registrants from nearly 30 countries attending today's session. Now, before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on PAI's channels after the event. For the Q&A portion of today's webinar, please feel free to submit a question for Nabia or Maliha at any time using the Q&A feature in the Zoom. We'll have some time at the end to take some of your questions. We also welcome you introducing yourselves in the chat. Now, if you have any tech challenges during the event, please send a message through the chat feature and a member of the PAI team will connect with you directly to resolve the issue. We also encourage you to connect with us on Twitter at PAI_org and use the Women Deliver 2023, hashtag WD 2023 and hashtag Catalyst Session, hashtags and handles. We'll also put those in the chat for ease. And now it's my enormous pleasure to turn the floor over to PAI's President and CEO, Nabiha Kazi-Hutchins. Nabiha?
Thank you so much, Jen. Greetings to all who are joining us today, and welcome to all of you for our very first PAI Catalyst session for 2023. My name is Nabiha Kazi-Hutchins, and I'm the President and CEO of PAI. And for those who don't know us well, PAI is a civil society organization. We are based in Washington, D.C., and for 58 years, we've been champions for universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights around the world. Because when we achieve sexual and reproductive health and rights, we achieve gender equality, we achieve health equity, economic prosperity, and so much more. We advocate to our own government in the United States to advance and ensure supportive policies and funding for SRHR globally. And we also amplify calls to action on the global stage. And because we recognize that we are one part of a very large global movement along so many of you who've joined us today, we also support an expanded civic space for SRHR advocacy. We collaborate with more than 80 community-based organizations in 31 countries. And by the way, 45% of these community-based organizations are women-led. Together, our reach extends to more than 1,800 organizations and advocates who are working in more than 60 countries worldwide. Like us, our partners and our extended ecosystem are advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights that meet the needs and the demands for their own communities. That beautiful song that some of you heard as you joined our call is titled Bogiyam. It is a Pakistani song in the languages of Burushaski and Urdu, and it's based on a poem by Nas Nafis, who is from Pakistan's Hunza Valley. The song is actually a song of love and longing, of love that was not attained despite the effort and the hope and the labor to attain it. And I do want to share a few of the stanzas from that song, which are translated into English with you, and you'll understand why I'm sharing that here in a little bit. Some of the lyrics say, and this is directly from the poem, I sowed a seed of wheat, but the harvest ripened in someone else's lands. The tree branch swayed towards me, but the fruit fell down in someone else's home. The fruit ripened right on top of the tree, far away from my reach. I thought to myself, it belongs to me, but it fell down in someone else's home. Again, this song is a song of heartbreak, but isn't it also the traditional way development has been done? That those who put in the most essential labor, those who are driving change, those who are taking the greatest risks in challenging systems and policies and ideology are also the last ones to be invited to the big stage, are the last ones to get on the news, are the ones who do not get to shape or set an agenda, are the ones who have not reaped the sustained rewards and recognition in equitable manners. But that is changing. We certainly have a long way to go, but it's changing. And our guest is among those who is not only calling for these changes, but also, like PAI, is doing the labor to ensure it. We are so pleased to have this space today with Dr. Maliha Khan, who's the president and CEO of Women Deliver. Dr. Khan brings 3 decades of leadership and expertise in gender equality. Her longstanding commitment to feminist movements and the empowerment of girls and women began in our native country of Pakistan, where she started her career implementing development projects in regions of the country where the greatest at-risk communities lived. She has led gender-focused programs at CARE and at Oxfam. She's worked alongside the Rockefeller Foundation and the Asian Development Bank to advance health and rights, and she led the program department at the Malala Fund. Dr. Khan firmly believes that organizations that are working to advance gender equality worldwide must be representative of the world's most vulnerable girls and women to truly achieve change. She's a fierce advocate. She's an inspiring advocate for challenging and dismantling our sector's colonial and racist legacies, and believes that real change is possible when we have concerted, intentional efforts to challenge structures and systems. It's not only a belief that underpins her leadership and her vision at Women Deliver, but it also underpins her achievements throughout her career. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, Maliha. And first and foremost, my most heartfelt Eid Mubarak to you and to all of our guests who are observing with us this special week for our community. Our mothers are probably very disappointed that we are working today, that we are working this week. But as I told my mother, justice and seeking justice doesn't take a break. So thank you for being here, Maliha.
First of all, Nabiha, Khair Mubarak, and Khair Mubarak to everyone who observes, who's watching. And indeed, not only that, but I didn't even make biryani. So it's a sad day.
Well, come over this evening. We're going to plan biryani at our house. So join us.
Absolutely. And thank you for that amazing introduction, Nabiha. I almost didn't recognize myself. I was impressed, but thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and this is very special for us to get this time with you. And, I guess I would just love to get started with you telling us about you and what really led you down this path, Maliha, the path that you've chosen, what inspired you to be part of these efforts to advance gender equality, to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights, and what, quite frankly, inspired you to join Women Deliver.
Thank you, Nabiha. And you know that song that you just played, it was truly inspiring, and actually brought me back to the start of my journey in this area. So it was very apropos too. My first exposure to the sort of rife injustices that occur and the real inequalities that exist, in Pakistan, started actually in Hunza. Where Brzezinski is, of course, the local language, and it's a very small mountainous area in Pakistan. And that was when I went to do my master's field research, as it was called at that time, in the anthropology department. We were asked to go and spend 6 months in a rural area and do research and then write our master's thesis on it. And I chose Hunza. And that's when I realized, and this is probably a ridiculous thing to say, that's when I realized how poor a country Pakistan was. I mean, both of us are from sort of middle-class families. We're urban, we get those privileges, and it just never occurs. We're not faced with the real inequalities and the sort of, the people who are living on 25 or 50 cents a day, who are so on the brink of all the sort of disasters that can befall them and have very little resilience in the face of it. And that was my first real exposure to it, spending 6 months in a village up in that Hunza region. And then what led me to sexual reproductive health and rights was that even when you work on gender equality issues, even when you don't work on sexual reproductive health and rights, it keeps coming back to you, right? You can be, the first like about 10, 12 years of my career was spent actually on natural resource management and agriculture, far removed from this, but it was focused on the role of girls and women in that, and what their, what their priorities, etc. were. And every time you'd sit down and talk to them, you could be talking about crop rotations, and it would come back to their bodily integrity and their sexual reproductive health and rights, them wanting information, them wanting help, them just wanting to talk about it because they didn't have opportunities to do that. And so, having circled around this area for a very long time, I'm finally very, very proud and privileged to be squarely in the middle of it, working with an organization that boldly says that without the full suite of sexual reproductive rights and access, women and girls will never be able to achieve gender equality. And I think that is the bottom line.
And you look at all of this through so many lenses, as you've shared, both professionally, but also academically in your research. You are a social anthropologist. And so, of course, you've studied and your research, you've seen firsthand, as you've described, the intersectionality of so many of these issues that impact progress for women and youth. And we're increasingly talking about intersectionality in development. In fact, I know that Women Deliver is centering feminist intersectionality in all of its work through its lens. Why is that intersectional lens so important? And beyond the words of why it's important, do you think, Maliha, that the programs and the funding models are truly reflecting this idea and supporting and recognizing that all of these issues are linked and we have to be much more intersectional in the way we do our advocacy, in the way we implement programs, and so on and so forth?
Intersectionality was coined as a phrase, as we both know, in 1989. It's taken a while to come to international development, as do most ideas. They take a little while to get into our system and for us to grapple with what does this mean operationally. So I think we are talking about intersectionality, but in a standard setting, aspirational kind of way, right? And at least we're doing that. At least we're doing that. We're recognizing that any one given identity that a person possesses does not necessarily define their experience of a context or their experience of an intervention, etc. So you can't just treat a person based on their one identity as a homogeneous group, right? Like, all women are not the same. All Asians are not the same, all immigrants are not the same, and that it's the layering of all these identities that also provides extra vulnerability. So when you are, say, a girl, and you are disabled, and you are a person of color, and you are an immigrant, all of these, one, are different from other people who possess those identities. And two, of course, layering them one on top of the other means you have particular sort of vulnerabilities in a particular way that you need to be approached and needed. Why it's taken us that long to figure out not all women are the same and not all aspirations of all women are the same? I mean, that's a question the feminist movement, I think, is still grappling with. And I think we're still having that conversation about the notions of feminism, the priorities, etc., are very much related to the other identities that people have and their own lived experiences and what they bring to the table. Are we as a, and I want to treat the question in two parts because I think it's quite different. Are we as a feminist movement really intersectional, and have we lived up to it? I think we're a little bit closer than we used to be, definitely. And I think the uprising of people of color, of the LGBTQI community, of others within this, people who have other identities, rising up against that, first two waves of feminism and saying, well, hold on, this is not necessarily what we aspire to. We have other considerations. Race is a big issue for us. Class is a big issue for us. Sexuality is a big issue for us, etc. Has started to slowly permeate in. Still hasn't completely transformed the feminist movement. And I think some of the rifts that we're seeing in the movement right now are definitely a marker of that, but perhaps are necessary, although I think they've gone too far. And we can talk about this at another point in the conversation. But has the international development grappled with it yet? again, to an aspirational level, yes. So we talk about, we like to put intersectionality and intergenerational in every sentence, right? At least we're doing that, although completely not enough. And I think we need to move away from being performative about it to actually sitting down and saying, well, what does this really mean operationally for us? And that is the bit that I think we're really profoundly uncomfortable grappling with, because what it means is giving up power, giving up our own power, right? Giving up the notions of where does knowledge lie, where does expertise lie, who decides priorities, where does, and then in terms of the deciding those priorities, who makes the decisions, particularly around funds and money flows, because that is what intersectionality then comes down to, not just, oh, we look at several demographic markers on a person and then say, check, 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 right? And that is the bit that I think we're still grappling with. We haven't gotten there, but I hope that this next round of thinking about it gets us a little bit closer to that aspirational of thinking about what does intersectionality mean in our sector.
And to your point, so much of this is around shifting power, which has its own power dynamic, right? Which we can get into another time. But yes, who is deciding, who is funding? And I think inherently also, Maliha, it's who is defining what success is, what progress is. Because if we don't go to that level, then to your point, it's performative, or even if there is funding and there's program intention, we're still not talking about the heart of it, of what does actual progress look like and through whose lens are we going to define that progress. And this is probably one of the reasons I'm most excited about Women Deliver. And it's a question I know that has been asked of you, has been asked of others, simply, why a global convening such as Women Deliver, and why in this moment?
That's a question we ask ourselves also, and we had to be completely honest with you. In this day and age of where we've gone through a global pandemic, a large convening, we're bringing together 6,000 people from 140 countries, right? An epidemiologist is probably having a heart attack at the thought of that, right? Because there are issues, and there's dangers, and we've clearly witnessed those in the last few years. Also in this day and age of the climate crisis, these 6,000 people are flying in to Kigali, Rwanda, and what does that mean in terms of global footprints, and is it necessary, etc. And then the other question is, naming the elephant in the room, why Women Deliver? Why should we organize this largest global convening on gender equality since the last Women Deliver, which happened in 2019? And the answer to all of this, I think, partly is that 6,000 people are registered to come. So clearly, there's a huge appetite out there. And by the way, we're already on a wait list, and the wait list is growing. It's already at like 500. So so there's clearly an appetite out there. And so one has to ask oneself, what is the appetite for? And to us, and we've been talking to lots and lots and lots of people there, it is around creating spaces, right? Because without having these spaces, and sometimes you need a physical space, not just a metaphoric space or a virtual space, without having these spaces to sit down as a movement, talk to each other, get to know each other, trust each other, rebuild those bonds, and through that, have the solidarity to go forward, we're never going to be able to move gender equality at the speed it needs to be moved. We know as human beings, the way we work, is that by coming together and having these conversations, and sometimes hard conversations, that's when you're able to make a quantum leap forward in terms of understandings, collaborations, settings, narratives. Narratives are very difficult to create without bringing large groups of people together who share in those narratives. Now you can say, well, what is the outcome of that? And how do we, and is it worth it? And one has to point to so many other moments in our history where large convenings of people really galvanize things forward. And I won't go and be as grandiose as saying, why did Martin Luther King need his million-man march? That's not what we're talking about. Although that is a question to ask, right? Why that? But we just have to look at even within gender equality, would we have been able to get as far as we did without Beijing, right? And that was first and foremost a convening. Would we be able to do that, go as far forward in SRHR without the ICPD, which again was a convening? These are all many years ago. So I think there's something to be said for human beings coming together, the need for human contact, the galvanizing force that comes behind it that takes us forward a quantum leap. And for many, many people, making those networks and connections that carry us forward so quickly in terms of our objectives. And that's why we're committed to holding this convening. I will say though, Maliha, that I'm also now publicly, and I've said this in multiple forums, but here this will be on record and it'll be on YouTube. Women Deliver is also committing to having an after action review as soon as the Women Deliver 2023 is finished. We want to have an external person come in and ask those very same questions. What worked? What didn't work? Why do we have it? And what's the impact rationale for it, right? Not any other rationale. Is it really moving the needle forward on so many of the things we care about? And we are also committing to making that public. And then after that, having a conversation with the movement who really are the owners of the convening itself. We're but the curators, to say, should we have further ones like this and what should they look like?
All of that resonates so well. And I think it's...
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, Maliha.
You're coming, and many colleagues from PAI are coming. Why are you coming to Women Deliver?
I think for so many of the reasons that you've noted, and our belief first and foremost that it is very important for advocates and for researchers and policymakers and donors to come together in shared space, because we can have the individual conversations all day long. We can have the direct engagement with one entity or another partner or a researcher all day long, and we do that. But at our core, from a PAI perspective, we also know the power that exists when we act as collective. When we come together, we connect, we learn from each other. This is part of the ecosystem of advocates, and knowing that we are stronger together. And so, I guess fundamentally for the few colleagues, we're being careful. We are making sure we respect the space for others who need to be there and not take up a lot of places on whether that be the wait list or the registration, but we have partners who we are also supporting to come, and the space to learn. This notion of community building and learning and exchange really fuels our movement. It strengthens our advocacy fabric. It also ensures resilience in really a very tough SRHR environment. So we're going back to your question, to listen, to learn, to engage, to support the partners who are attending, and also expand our partnerships. And, speaking of engaging, Maliha, and listening and learning from each other, of course, being future focused always, but we also can't ignore these very complicated forces that are against our movement, that are against rights, against justice. And I want to talk a little bit about that. We know that the anti-rights, the anti-gender forces are alive and well. They have been there for a very long time, and they're also very well funded. So all of the solidarity in the world does little if we also are not intentionally, deliberately allocating funding and launching these strategies, and more specifically targeting these opposition moves. Of course, complementing, all the other work that we're doing to protect and advance rights. And I'm curious, from your perspective, talk a little bit about that. Why is it important that we work collectively as a movement to counter these anti-rights forces? And how are we going to more effectively unleash ourselves, and perhaps more powerfully, to counter these forces?
Yeah, a great question, Maliha. And that's something that, we've been really grappling with and asking ourselves over the last couple of years. And I know so many others have too. And that's why we're making it one of the central things that we'll be talking about at Women Deliver, and we're having a few sessions around that. I think there's a couple of things that are very important to make, to sort of for us all to grapple with. One, that there is something more in these anti-rights movement than just a conservative nativism that's coming up and reacting to progress being too quickly and them not being able to, having a cognitive dissonance between the changes that are happening and wanting to hold on to the past, right? I think we need to acknowledge that there's a whole movement out there. It's a minority, but there is a movement out there that believes in ideologically in a world that is quite opposite to the world we believe in, where individuals have rights, where gender and sexual minorities have as many rights as anyone else does, and where women and girls have control over their own body and can make their own decisions, right? And their ideology is opposite of that, and they're moving forward to realize their ideology, not only in their own national contexts, and this is mostly pointing to, what the centers of the export of this anti-gender ideology from the US and Europe, but also, and as you and I well know, from some centers in the Middle East that's exporting a certain form of Islamic anti-rights ideology. But that, it's important to recognize them, to understand who they are, where their funding is coming from, what tactics they're using, not because they don't have a right to do what they're doing, but because what they're doing has a direct impingement on the rights of people that we care about, who are the most vulnerable. And always comes down to the most vulnerable. They never quite attack those that are in power and have the ability to defend themselves. But also it almost always comes down on the bodies of those vulnerable people, one way or the other, whether they're LGBTQI individuals or they're girls and women, and about their bodily integrity. So one of the things I think we need to understand is how they operate, where their funding comes from, what their tactics are, what their 20, 30, 40-year objectives are, because that's as long as their time horizons are. And we're seeing some, we've got some cases right in front of us. Just a little while ago, we had the 1-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision. That was a move by the anti-rights movement, that they sat down and thought about it for at least 20, if not 30 years, about how do you overturn this landmark decision that gives rights to people, right? We don't like it. How do we overturn it? We've seen a very recent move, for instance, in Uganda around the LGBTQI anti-rights legislation that was just passed. That was also a part of this movement, and are actually very intimately connected once you start to trace who's doing what and where the monies flow. So we need to have a real look at this, and we need to think about what our narratives are and how do we counter it. We need to think about our tactics. And we need to think about spaces. And this is where the connection with Women Deliver becomes very, very clear, because the anti-rights movement have occupied the multilateral spaces, the spaces where we used to have aspirational and inspirational frameworks, CSW, ICPD, Beijing, and so forth. All of those things, gave us standards we could aspire to. And those spaces have now been occupied. I mean, many people now, and you talk to anyone who's engaged in those multilateral spaces, they will say that we can never, ever have a Beijing now that we did so many decades ago, right? It's just not possible. It would never be allowed to happen. So we need to create these alternative spaces where we can be aspirational, where we can set standards. And I think that's the connection of what we'd like to discuss around this.
Yeah, and to your point, I'm just thinking about ICPD this year. There was no outcomes document.
Intentionally
no outcomes document.
Exactly.
Right? And we're about to embark upon the big global convening next year. And we couldn't get an outcomes document at CPD this year in New York. So it tells you, to your point, yeah, the opposition is alive and well, but also in really interesting spaces where they are exerting a lot of power and a lot of influence. And to your point on the spaces, that's very much part of your theme this year for Women Deliver: Spaces, Solidarity, and Solutions. So tell us a little bit more about this theme, and how are we going to concretely see it manifest itself in Kigali? What are we going to expect? Who's going to be there? What do you want from attendees, both in person and virtually, to gain? And what are the wins for you at the close of the conference?
So many. How many hours do we have, Nabia?
As many as you need.
No. I mean, I think the theme, it's really the spaces bit of it is where I get very, very excited, right? And the other two come from that. We need, as I already said, we need more global spaces for the feminist movement, for gender equality. And we are always questioning ourselves, should we not? I know you had that conversation with me, if I can just put it out.
Absolutely.
You said, Maliha, should I even come as a CEO? Should I seed this? Should I send someone else? And I said, no, actually, as a leader, you need to be there, but you need to be there in a mode that's supportive and listening, not in the usual CEO diva mode. And I know you don't. I know you don't do that. This is why I could say that to you right off the bat. But it's important to have these spaces where leadership from across the world, across the sectors, and across the types of organizations. So we have private sector, multilaterals, civil society, INGOs, governments, and politicians all coming who care passionately about gender equality to sit there and talk about it. And these spaces are important for two reasons. One, we just physically haven't met in so long. I think that's why people are so hungry to get together and just meet each other again. But two, as I said, we have to redefine and reoccupy global spaces. We've sort of left the multilaterals, like I said, those spaces are not moving things forward in the ways that we wanted to. And we've moved towards, all of us are talking about sort of localization and national level priorities, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But in that, we're forgetting a little bit that all of these people have to come together and have conversations at a global level too, right? We know that what happens in Pakistan is not unconnected with what happens in so many other parts of the world, or pick up any other Uganda or Kenya or Colombia, etc. And so all the people who are working together need to have that opportunity to talk about what are the issues, define our narratives, set our aspirational goals, and just come together to feel like we're not doing this by ourselves and alone. And I think that's really, really important. So defining a global space that's inclusive, that's shifting the leadership to those, and you mentioned this before, who are closest and most representative of the populations that are vulnerable, and ones that also are open to having hard conversations, right? But hard conversations without then turning against each other, canceling each other out, and wanting and going down the route that we have too much of a tendency to go down in that way. Of course, these spaces will then create the solidarity, and you said it so beautifully when you were talking about your reasons for coming to Women Deliver, which is that we can't achieve all these objectives by ourselves. We need the collective to come together in order to do it. And so that solidarity is what allows the collective impact to happen. The last one I'll mention, solutions. I think sometimes we think about solutions as a technical solution, and I think there are some technical solutions out there, but for the most part, for almost all our problems, we know what the technical solutions are, right? We know what the evidence is telling us. What we need are political solutions. We need grassroots movements and broad movements that include a number of different levels and sectors to push for the political will, small p political will, whether it be politicians or it be multilateral organizations, or it be nations, or it be societies, to have the will to do what we know we should do. And therein lies the solution part of it. Who's coming? I already said 6,000 people registered from over 140 countries are coming, everything from grassroots organizations to heads of state, heads of government, and ministers, multilateral heads of multilateral organizations, you, me, all sorts of other people. And what I want for everybody to do, to come there with, one is a real wish to connect with people that we haven't connected with in a long time in person, but also people we don't often get a chance to connect with because our daily lives do not allow it. And that means we have to go beyond our usual circles and open up and do that, but also to talk about the real issues. Let's not shy away from things that need to be named. For instance, the racism issue in our own sectors. For instance, the complete suite of sexual reproductive health and rights, and having the courage to say that actually we stand with those girls and women who need X and Y. To talk about the controversy that's tearing the feminist movement apart right now with the anti-trans movement and agendas. And I think, you know, all of those conversations are hard conversations, but if we don't have them, then we can't move forward. And that's my wish in Kigali in just a few short weeks.
So you
conversations with that.
It's all under control. I know it. I see it.
Completely.
See it. You have an incredible team, so it's going to be great. You know, you brought up the example of Pakistan just now in your comment, and you and I have talked a lot about the digital divide, of course, as it relates not just to SRHR, but overall progress. And you know, in Pakistan, and using Pakistan as an example, we know there's so much important work. There's a committed civil society in Pakistan, academic leaders, policymakers, some, not all, if I can say that about our own country, to advance SRHR, and who are also working toward gender equality in Pakistan. However, Pakistan, like many other countries in the global majority, still have a long journey ahead. Yeah. This piece around the digital divide, as it relates to health access, as it relates to SRHR, there is some very exciting work that's underway, from femtech to improving information and access to care and knowledge, and tackling issues around stigma that get directly into the hands of people. How does technology factor into accelerating access to care and services? And I guess a build on that, what's standing in the way to unleash that power of technology so it can be at the forefront of the kind of change that we want to see in countries like Pakistan, where we may not have an open forum conversation around comprehensive sexuality education in some of our villages and rural communities, but we might have a conversation about it directly via our phone.
Yep. Yeah.
So talk to us about that.
You know, Pakistan is such a paradox in so many ways, and you and I know it well. You know, at one level, you know, we're not very good with gender and sexual minorities, but yet actually the trans rights bills that would just pass in Pakistan are some of the most progressive in the world. Go figure that out, right? You know,
well, and just even socially and culturally, Maliha, the trans community in Pakistan, there is this notion, and it is well established, that they are closest to God.
Yeah.
They are closest to God. So it is, to your point, very interesting from an anthropological, social, even religious context. What's going on there, right?
Yeah, and you know, and also on just comprehensive sexuality education, Nabia, you probably know this, but I bet a lot of people don't. That actually the government of Pakistan, or the provinces, the 3 out of the 5 provinces of Pakistan actually have CSE as a part of the state curriculum. They call it life skills, but it's CSE, and it's really progressive, and it's absolutely amazing. Yeah, Pakistan's a paradox. But, you know, in terms of what to do there, and the role of tech, you know, you and I have had lots of conversations about how do you, if we have to pay attention to this gender digital divide. It's real and it's growing. And it's real, it's growing because of social norms, right? Communities cottoned on really, really quickly that digital technology is a form of getting information and giving you virtual mobility where you don't have physical mobility, right? And that is its downfall as far as, you know, the use for furthering some of our agendas. It's also its strength. So there's a lot of social norms around not giving women, but particularly not giving girls, access to digital technology, because, and pardon my one sentence in Urdu, ladki kharab ho jayegi agar usko phone mil gaya. Translated,
Critique.
if a girl gets a phone, oh my God, that's her moral downfall. She will be corrupted. The next thing you know, she'll have a boyfriend. And the next day, within like a day or two, she would have eloped and brought complete shame to the family. And so with that narrative, girls are being kept away from digital technology. There's study after study that's coming out recently, and not just in Pakistan, but in a lot of countries, where the gap between adolescent girls and adolescent boys having access to digital technology is not only is there, but is growing and growing and growing. And that means you're having a generation of girls who are not who don't have as much access as as boys do. And so when you get into their 20s and 30s, you're going to have a whole generation that is not digital native and don't have access, and therefore won't be able to do all the things they do. And that includes banking, getting access to benefits, and as you said, having access to information and services through through mobile and digital means. And so I think we can leapfrog and get information to so many people if we're able to do that, but only if the people have access to it, and also if they control the access, and that access isn't negotiated and navigated through a man in their lives, which is often even the women and girls who have access, they're using a phone that's primarily controlled by a husband, a father, or a brother. And so I think the one of the most important things we can do is remove the social barriers to that and that stigma.
And youth have a very important role in all of this. I've got two more questions, and then we've got some questions from our attendees. Others, if you have questions, please do post some of them. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to pull out the ones that keep emerging, and certainly we'll share the other topics so our teams can circle back with you. So two more questions on this, from me at least. Regarding youth and gender equality, as a sector, of course, we're embracing and we're creating a lot of space for youth advocates. It's so important. I always say that youth are today's leaders. They're also today's change makers, and they're also going to drive and sustain progress for the future. What do you see as the greatest bright spots as it relates to youth engagement in our movement? And what do we need to do through an intergenerational lens? Because let's not forget that there are generations who are ahead of us who bring so much relevant wisdom still to this day. So through an intergenerational lens and through a multi-sectoral lens to ensure that youth remain engaged in this movement for the long term, not just for the next several years.
I mean, I think key is that, one of the first things you said, Maliha, which is, those that are closest to the vulnerable people that need change to happen in their lives. And that is where I think, we immediately need to start to go to a much more nuanced intergenerational dialogue and conversation, and a passing over control. It's people of our age group that hold the most power right now, right? We won't name our age, but we're the ones who are in leadership positions right now because we're right at that demographic. But we need to recognize that there's actually people who are in chronologically, older generations who are being left out of the conversations, and their needs and wishes aren't being, taken into account. And then there's people who are younger chronologically, who again are not being seen in the same ways, and decisions are being made from our perspective. But if we actually start to think about who are the most vulnerable and who are the most affected, going not only right now, but also going into the future, then immediately we shouldn't be just engaging. And I actually have a real problem with the phrase youth engagement. Why are we engaging youth? Why are we not ceding them the rightful place in leadership that they should have, instead of holding it ourselves? So I think it should be, leadership, and age should not be a barrier to leadership. So those who show the right, attitudes, who are closest, who represent, who have the lived experience, should be given leadership opportunities and not withheld from that. So to me, it is stop saying we're engaging youth, having one conversation with them, and then going on and doing exactly what we did before. but rather saying we need to have leadership, or at the very least co-leadership. If we're too afraid to hand it over, let's at least have co-leadership, right? Let's start to at least put that narrative out there. And I think it's really, really important. The brightest spots for me are the fact that youth are just not taking this BS anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They're standing up and they're demanding their rights. And sometimes, even for me, it gets a little bit uncomfortable because I'm called on my own. And it's like, no, but what about this and what about that? And I'm like, whoa, okay, let me just sit down for 1 second. And no, actually, you know what? You're right. Let's have that conversation and let's actually cede control where it's necessary. So just as a for example on this one, Nabiha, not only did we include 1/3 of our advisory group that led the creation of Women Deliver, and there was 60 people coming from a wide variety of organizations that were a part of it. But I also had a youth committee, people under the age of 30 who are leading a whole dedicated program, stream of dedicated programming at Women Deliver. And it was very, very uncomfortable, but we handed it over to them. And we're like, we're not going to interfere, and we're going to see what comes out of it. And whatever you decide, we're going to agree with it. And there were moments where we felt like stepping in and being like, but we didn't. And it's absolutely amazing what's come from that.
So no wonder I wasn't invited to the youth committee.
No.
I didn't meet
the
age demographic.
I know there's a youth pre-conference that if you're not under the age of 30, you're not going to it.
Yeah, no, and that's good. I shouldn't be invited to that party. So,
and it's where the cool disco is going to happen too.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the cool disco piece of all of this. And this is my last question, but we have a couple of very good questions from those who are attending. I'm so excited about the Arts and Film Festival at Women Deliver. And, the incredible filmmaker and artist, Lisa Russell, she's leading that charge. There was, it seems, an intentionality in how this was curated. So speak to that. What are we going to see and experience? And what is the role of arts in gender equality?
I think art is one of the most neglected parts of gender equality, and yet we get so much inspiration and aspiration from it. The fact that we played the song at the beginning, right? And then we thought about the words of it and how they touched us, not because of the words, not just because of the words themselves, which were inspiring and amazing, but also the way it was conveyed to us. It reaches a different part of our brain, right? It triggers a different emotional response. And I think that's the important bit. We tend to get way too bogged down in our technical issues. And I'm a measurement person. I'm very technical. I don't dabble in the artistic side at all. But you have to acknowledge that it reaches a different part of your being as a human being. And it's important to make those connections. This is about ideology. This is about emotion. This is about our future and our aspirations. It's not just technical things and technical solutions. And that's why we and shout out to the team who've really been leading the Arts and Film Festival. We have art installations, we have films, we have performances. We're making a commitment that almost every panel of the plenaries will also have an artistic component. Not all of them, but we're trying very hard. And that we also have a separate section where all the entrance to the Arts and Film Festival and the prizes will be available and play, and people can go and witness them, because artists are also activists, and activists need to touch base with that artistic side to get our emotional reactions going and to sustain us. And that's why we felt it was a very important part to include in the conference.
So, Dr. Khan, we have to talk about something very serious here.
Uh-oh.
You encourage all of us. You encourage and infuse possibility and positivity across the community of what we can do and should do and try and why not. However, you've been surprisingly self-deprecating about your own artistic talents and your own artistic contributions. So I would like to know, What's your contribution going to be at the Arts and Film Festival? Are you singing? Are you dancing? Are you playing an instrument? Are you showing photography? What is your plan?
I will be contributing what I do best at any artistic setting. I clap for those who have talent.
Well, very well. Very well. We'll take that. You know, we need to have audience members as well to encourage us. So
I'm a very appreciative audience member.
So let's go to a couple of the questions from the chat. The first one comes from a guest who is in Uganda, saying, is there room to align the language for comprehensive sexuality education according to the range of country contexts, right? We know what should be universally included, but what's your take on this? How do you adapt and ensure that the information comes through in a culturally appropriate way that also doesn't dilute the message?
I think the information has to come through in a culturally appropriate way and in a language that is accessible to those that need the information. And accessibility also includes what is acceptable. If you're going to make it into something that is culturally shocking and unacceptable to people, then not only are you creating a barrier to the individual that needs to receive it, because it's about their rights, it's about their knowledge, it's about their own body and futures. So the point isn't to shock them, right? And what's the point? You're not going to get any further with that. But also what is acceptable in their own context. You don't want to create unnecessary barriers to that. So I actually think, you know, what we were mentioning before, the ways that the life skills curriculum was rolled out in some provinces in Pakistan. And there's a case study that's been written up about about that, and the NGO in Pakistan, Ahang, that led that charge and did such an amazing job over the last 20, 30 years. So it doesn't happen overnight. School by school, training by training, getting all of that done with a wide variety of other institutions and organizations is a real case in point. Let us not get stuck on names. Let us not make a sort of a ideological stance on what something is called, because at the end of the day, it is about the girls and boys that need to know about their bodies, the ways that reproductive health works, and their rights. That is the bottom line. So call it whatever you want.
Yeah, let's just be very clear about what needs to happen and get to that finish line, right? There's another question around your expectations from the convening in Rwanda in terms of advocacy outcomes, and what do you think might be different? Where may they differ from previous Women Deliver conferences?
Yeah, so one of the things that we want to make clear is Women Deliver is not a commitment-making forum, right? It is providing, so we're not curating the outcomes, and there's going to be no outcome document. We're a very small team. I mean, Nabiha, we're 30. We're 30 people, so that's it. There's no way we're curating an outcome document that's coming out of a convening that's 6,000 people, almost 200 side events, and all sorts of and that's beyond the main programming that's happening. So a few of the things though that we want to make sure, and we have worked very, very hard to ensure that happen. One is that civil society is front and center. It's a big inclusive gathering, and I named all the different types of people who are coming there, including government, including politicians, including the private sector, in addition to civil society and the multilaterals. But we want to make sure that the conversations center and focus on civil society, because it's very, very important. This is our only gathering, right? All the other ones have different gatherings that happen. The second is that we connect it with other big policy windows. It isn't just a moment in time. It thinks about what happened before it in terms of moving gender equality, and it thinks about what's coming after. So we have been working very hard with all sorts of institutions and organizations, making connections with the Generation Equality Forum, making connections with ICPD, making connections with the Maputo Protocol, and a number of other things. With COP with the G20. So there's all sorts of, connective thread that's bringing narratives in and conversations, and then taking narratives and conversations to the next stage, because it's in that way that we can do it. So all of these things are things that we're really working hard on, and I hope, fingers crossed, we've been successful in it.
Another question related to the integration of sexual and reproductive health programs into community approaches for effective humanitarian responses. And, we're dealing with these crises, not just the aftermath of COVID, but also the ongoing threats to public health crises, climate, et cetera. So how does this get integrated? How does our work and our advocacy get integrated programmatically for these effective responses in our communities around the world that are being affected by humanitarian crisis?
Well, I want to broaden that question actually also
Sure.
to say it's not just about how do you make sure that SRHR is an integral and always they're part of humanitarian response, because women don't stop having reproductive health needs when a flood happens or an earthquake happens or a war breaks out. In fact, those needs become even more vital to be addressed. But also making the connection between girls' and women's bodily integrity and their ability to be resilient in the face of shocks and stresses. We know that girls and women are more affected by humanitarian disasters than any other segment of society, all other things being held equal, and also that they have less resilience to recover and thrive post those. In Pakistan last year, just exactly 1 year ago right now, we had some of the worst floods in Pakistan's history. You and I are very aware of that. And you had at one point there was an estimation there were 750,000 women who were displaced by the floods who would be giving birth while they were displaced. Right, so reproductive health rights do not go away. And girls and women become even more vulnerable. So we need to make those connections between those that contribute the least to these disasters, be they conflict or be they climate crisis driven ones, suffer the most during them and actually have the least resilience in the face of them and the ability to recover. And a lot of it is tied into their bodily integrity. So we need to be very, very vehemently making that case for the most vulnerable girls and women.
I have a last question, then, I'll leave open space for anything else that you want to add and what we didn't cover. The question is the role of men and boys. We both have sons, which we are raising to be, of course, feminists. And on the right side of our work, there's a great book actually by Sonora Jha called How to Raise a Feminist Son. So those who haven't read it should. I'll bring you one, so don't buy it. Don't buy it, Maliha.
Okay.
But what is the role of men and boys in our movement at Women Deliver, outside of Women Deliver, in our homes?
Well, this, I have three things to say. One is we cannot allow this conversation to become one about what about, right? Because I think that is leading it off the track and saying, what about men and boys? Well, no one is saying, let's not focus on men and boys. And most of our interventions actually do focus on men and boys. So let's not do the whataboutery. That's number one. The second is, of course, there's a role for men and boys, because we have to engage men and boys in this to redefine masculinity, to redefine what their roles are, and to really think through how they have to be a part of the change. The change doesn't happen without them, because gender is about all the ways that gender is defined, including masculinity, including men and boys, including those that don't identify as either girls, boys, men, or women, right? So we have to sort of open up those definitions and those conversations. But the third, and this is the thing we really need to emphasize, is that men and boys are better off in a more feminist world. And there's and as much as I was saying, this is an emotive and political issue, there's so much evidence out there over and over and over again that shows that when you start to apply feminist principles to all sorts of contexts, when there is a more gender equal context or world or country or whatever it is, men and boys thrive, right? They are by every measure, they are better off. Women and girls are better off. Everyone is better off. And so I think those are the 3 points we have to make in relationship to what about men and boys?
We are all better off, is what it comes down to. I want to thank you, Maliha, for all of your time. You always inspire. You have such a way of just casting new lights and new perspectives on some of these really tough issues that we continue to battle. But I also find a lot of, as I said, inspiration and strength in so much of what you said. And I think that's exactly the tone and tenor that seems to be the case for Women Deliver. I thank all of our guests. I know we couldn't get to all of your questions, but we are saving all of them. We'll share them with the Women Deliver team. And my only last remark before I hand it over to you is it's going to be an incredible gathering. I thank everyone who's joined us for your leadership, for your very hard work, for being so steadfast in our movement. We are absolutely stronger together. And I know we're coming together with a lot of love and kindness in Kigali, but we have to be very purposeful about that. So with that, over to you, Maliha, for your final words.
Well, I mean, I would be very remiss by, first of all, didn't start by thanking you and the team at PAI for giving this absolutely amazing opportunity. Really, really appreciate it. But also, just thanking, first of all, the Women Deliver team in getting us this far. When I joined a little bit over a year ago, it just seemed so daunting and so impossible to pull this off. And yet here we are, almost the brink of everyone gathering. But also, I really, really want to thank, the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've contributed time, effort, funding, and content, most of all content, to the conference. We're going to come together and have those conversations, and wanted to thank everybody for their devotion to gender equality and wanting to achieve it. Really, really humbled by that.
Thank you, Maliha. So we will wrap up here and stay tuned. As Jen said, we'll share the recording. We'll also share the song because it is a song I love. And now we know it's connected to Hunza, where Maliha was as well. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in Kigali, whether in person or online.
Thank you so much.